preached originally as a sermon in the Church of St. Mary the Virgin, Oxford, on June 8, 1942. If you asked 20 good men today what they thought the highest of the virtues, 19 of them would reply, unselfishness. But if you asked almost any of the great Christians of old, he would have replied, love. You see what has happened. A negative term has been substituted for a positive, and this is of more than philological importance. The negative ideal of unselfishness carries with it the suggestion not primarily of securing good things for others, but of going without them ourselves, as if our abstinence and not their happiness was the important point. I do not think this is the Christian virtue of love. The New Testament has lots to say about self-denial, but not about self-denial as an end in itself. We are told to deny ourselves and to take up our crosses in order that we may follow Christ. And nearly every description of what we shall ultimately find if we do so contains an appeal to desire. If there lurks in most modern minds the notion that to desire our own good and earnestly to hope for the enjoyment of it is a bad thing, I submit that this notion has crept in from Kant and the Stoics and is no part of the Christian faith. Indeed, if we consider the unblushing promises of reward and the staggering nature of the rewards promised in the Gospels, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. We must not be troubled by unbelievers when they say that this promise of reward makes the Christian life a mercenary affair. There are different kinds of rewards. There is the reward which has no natural connection with the things you do to earn it, and is quite foreign to the desires that ought to accompany those things. Money is not the natural reward of love. That is why we call a man mercenary, if he marries a woman for the sake of her money. But marriage is the proper reward for a real lover, and he is not mercenary for desiring it. A general who fights well in order to get a peerage is mercenary. A general who fights for victory is not, victory being the proper reward of battle, as marriage is the proper reward of love. The proper rewards are not simply tacked on to the activity for which they are given, but are the activity itself in consummation. There is also a third case, which is more complicated. An enjoyment of Greek poetry is certainly a proper, and not a mercenary, reward for learning Greek. But only those who have reached the stage of enjoying Greek poetry can tell from their own experience that this is so. The schoolboy beginning Greek grammar cannot look forward to his adult enjoyment of Sophocles as a lover looks forward to marriage or a general to victory. He has to begin by working for marks, or to escape punishment, or to please his parents, or at best in the hope of a future good, which he cannot at present imagine or desire. His position, therefore, bears a certain resemblance to that of the mercenary. The reward he is going to get will, in actual fact, be a natural or proper reward, but he will not know that till he has got it. Of course, he gets it gradually. Enjoyment creeps in upon the mere drudgery, and nobody could point to a day or an hour when the one ceased and the other began. But it is just in so far as he approaches the reward that he becomes able to desire it for its own sake. Indeed, the power of so desiring it is itself a preliminary reward. The Christian, in relation to heaven, is in much the same position as this schoolboy. Those who have attained everlasting life in the vision of God doubtless know very well that it is no mere bribe, but the very consummation of their earthly discipleship. But we who have not yet attained it cannot know this in the same way, and cannot even begin to know it at all except by continuing to obey and finding the first reward of our obedience in our increasing power, to desire the ultimate reward. Just in proportion as the desire grows, our fear, lest it should be a mercenary desire, will die away, and finally be recognized as an absurdity. But probably this will not for most of us happen in a day. Poetry replaces grammar, gospel replaces law, longing transforms obedience as gradually as the tide lifts a grounded ship. But there is one other important similarity between the schoolboy and ourselves. If he is an imaginative boy, he will, quite probably, be reveling in the English poets and romancers suitable to his age, sometime before he begins to suspect that Greek grammar is going to lead him to more and more enjoyments of this same sort. He may even be neglecting his Greek to read Shelley and Swinburne in secret, In other words, the desire which Greek is really going to gratify already exists in him, and is attached to objects which seem to him quite unconnected with Xenophon and the verbs in me. Now, if we are made for heaven, the desire for our proper place will be already in us, but not yet attached to the true object, and will even appear as the rival of that object. And this, I think, is just what we find. No doubt there is one point in which my analogy of the schoolboy breaks down. The English poetry which he reads when he ought to be doing Greek exercises may be just as good as the Greek poetry to which the exercises are leading him, so that in fixing on Milton instead of journeying on to Aeschylus, his desire is not embracing a false object. But our case is very different. If a transtemporal, transfinite good is our real destiny, then any other good on which our desire fixes must be in some degree fallacious, must bear at best only a symbolical relation to what will truly satisfy. In speaking of this desire for our own far-off country, which we find in ourselves even now, I feel a certain shyness. I am almost committing an indecency. I am trying to rip open the inconsolable secret in each one of you, the secret which hurts so much that you take your revenge on it by calling it names like nostalgia and romanticism and adolescence. The secret also which pierces with such sweetness that when, in very intimate conversation, the mention of it becomes imminent, we grow awkward and affect to laugh at ourselves. The secret we cannot hide and cannot tell, though we desire to do both. We cannot tell it because it is a desire for something that has never actually appeared in our experience. We cannot hide it because our experience is constantly suggesting it, and we betray ourselves like lovers at the mention of a name. Our commonest expedient is to call it beauty and behave as if that had settled the matter. Wordsworth's expedient was to identify it with certain moments in his own past. But all this is a cheat. If Wordsworth had gone back to those moments in the past, he would not have found the thing itself, but only the reminder of it. What he remembered would turn out to be itself a remembering. The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them. It only came through them, and what came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshippers. For they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited. Do you think I am trying to weave a spell? Perhaps I am, but remember your fairy tales. Spells are used for breaking enchantments as well as for inducing them. And you and I have need of the strongest spell that can be found to wake us from the evil enchantment of worldliness, which has been laid upon us for nearly 100 years. Almost our whole education has been directed to silencing this shy, persistent inner voice. Almost all our modern philosophies have been devised to convince us that the good of man is to be found on this earth. And yet it is a remarkable thing that such philosophies of progress or creative evolution themselves bear reluctant witness to the truth that our real goal is elsewhere. When they want to convince you that earth is your home, notice how they set about it. They begin by trying to persuade you that earth can be made into heaven, thus giving a sop to your sense of exile in earth as it is. Next, they tell you that this fortunate event is still a good way off in the future, thus giving a sop to your knowledge that the fatherland is not here and now. Finally, lest your longing for the trans-temporal should awake and spoil the whole affair, they use any rhetoric that comes to hand to keep out of your mind the recollection that even if all the happiness they promised could come to man on earth, yet still each generation would lose it by death, including the last generation of all, and the whole story would be nothing, not even a story, forever and ever. Hence all the nonsense that Mr. Shaw puts into the final speech of Lilith, and Bergson's remark that the elan vital is capable of surmounting all obstacles, perhaps even death, as if we could believe that any social or biological development on this planet will delay the senility of the sun, or reverse the second law of thermodynamics. Do what they will then, we remain conscious of a desire which no natural happiness will satisfy. But is there any reason to suppose that reality offers any satisfaction to it? Nor does being hungry prove that we have bread. But I think it may be urged that this misses the point. A man's physical hunger does not prove that that man will get any bread. He may die of starvation on a raft in the Atlantic. But surely a man's hunger does prove that he comes from a race which repairs its body by eating and inhabits a world where edible substances exist. In the same way, though I do not believe, I wish I did, that my desire for paradise proves that I shall enjoy it. I think it a pretty good indication that such a thing exists and that some men will. A man may love a woman and not win her, but it would be very odd if the phenomenon called falling in love occurred in a sexless world. Here then is the desire still wandering and uncertain of its object, and still largely unable to see that object in the direction where it really lies. Our sacred books give us some account of the object. It is, of course, a symbolic account. Heaven is, by definition, outside our experience, but all intelligible descriptions must be of things within our experience. The scriptural picture of heaven is therefore just as symbolical as the picture which our desire, unaided, invents for itself. Heaven is not really full of jewelry any more than it is really the beauty of nature, or a fine piece of music. The difference is that the scriptural imagery has authority. It comes to us from writers who were closer to God than we, and it has stood the test of Christian experience down the centuries. The natural appeal of this authoritative imagery is to me at first very small. At first sight it chills rather than awakes my desire, and that is just what I ought to expect. If Christianity could tell me no more of the far-off land than my own temperament led me to surmise already, then Christianity would be no higher than myself. If it has more to give me, I must expect it to be less immediately attractive than my own stuff. Sophocles at first seems dull and cold to the boy who has only reached Shelley. If our religion is something objective, then we must never avert our eyes from those elements in it which seem puzzling or repellent, for it will be precisely the puzzling or the repellent which conceals what we do not yet know and need to know. The promises of Scripture may very roughly be reduced to 5 heads. It is promised, firstly, that we shall be with Christ; secondly, that we shall be like him; thirdly, with an enormous wealth of imagery, that we shall have glory; fourthly, that we shall, in some sense, be fed or feasted or entertained; and finally, that we shall have some sort of official position in the universe, ruling cities, judging angels, being pillars of God's temple. The first question I ask about these promises is, why any of them except the first? Can anything be added to the conception of being with Christ? For it must be true, as an old writer says, that he who has God and everything else has no more than he who has God only. I think the answer turns again on the nature of symbols. For though it may escape our notice at first glance, yet it is true that any conception of being with Christ, which most of us can now form, will be not very much less symbolical than the other promises. For it will smuggle in ideas of proximity in space and loving conversation as we now understand conversation, and it will probably concentrate on the humanity of Christ to the exclusion of his deity. And in fact, we find that those Christians who attend solely to this first promise always do fill it up with very earthly imagery indeed. In fact, with hymeneal or erotic imagery. I am not for a moment condemning such imagery. I heartily wish I could enter into it more deeply than I do, and pray that I yet shall. But my point is that this also is only a symbol, like the reality in some respects, but unlike it in others, and therefore needs correction from the different symbols in the other promises. The variation of the promises does not mean that anything other than God will be our ultimate bliss, but because God is more than a person, and lest we should imagine the joy of his presence too exclusively in terms of our present poor experience of personal love, with all its narrowness and strain and monotony, a dozen changing images, correcting and relieving each other, are supplied. I turn next to the idea of glory. There is no getting away from the fact that this idea is very prominent in the New Testament and in early Christian writings. Salvation is constantly associated with palms, crowns, white robes, thrones, and splendor like the sun and stars. All this makes no immediate appeal to me at all, and in that respect I fancy I am a typical modern. Glory suggests 2 ideas to me, of which one seems wicked and the other ridiculous. Either glory means to me fame or it means luminosity. As for the first, since to be famous means to be better known than other people, the desire for fame appears to me as a competitive passion and therefore of hell, rather than heaven. As for the second, who wishes to become a kind of living electric light bulb? When I began to look into this matter, I was shocked to find such different Christians as Milton, Johnson, and Thomas Aquinas, taking heavenly glory quite frankly in the sense of fame or good report, but not fame conferred by our fellow creatures, fame with God, approval, or, I might say, appreciation by God. And then when I had thought it over, I saw that this view was scriptural. Nothing can eliminate from the parable the divine accolade, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." With that, a good deal of what I had been thinking all my life fell down like a house of cards. I suddenly remembered that no one can enter heaven except as a child. And nothing is so obvious in a child, not in a conceited child, but in a good child, as its great and undisguised pleasure in being praised. Not only in a child either, but even in a dog or a horse. Apparently what I had mistaken for humility had, all these years, prevented me from understanding what is in fact the humblest, the most childlike, the most creaturely of pleasures. Nay, the specific pleasure of the inferior, the pleasure a beast before men, a child before its father, a pupil before his teacher, a creature before its creator. I am not forgetting how horribly this most innocent desire is parodied in our human ambitions, or how very quickly, in my own experience, the lawful pleasure of praise from those whom it was my duty to please turns into the deadly poison of self-admiration. But I thought I could detect a moment, a very, very short moment before this happened, during which the satisfaction of having pleased those whom I rightly loved and rightly feared was pure. And that is enough to raise our thoughts to what may happen when the redeemed soul, beyond all hope and nearly beyond belief, learns at last that she has pleased him whom she was created to please. There will be no room for vanity then. She will be free from the miserable illusion that it is her doing. With no taint of what we should now call self-approval, she will most innocently rejoice in the thing that God has made her to be, and the moment which heals her old inferiority complex forever will also drown her pride deeper than Prospero's book. Perfect humility dispenses with modesty. If God is satisfied with the work may be satisfied with itself. It is not for her to bandy compliments with her sovereign. I can imagine someone saying that he dislikes my idea of heaven as a place where we are patted on the back. But proud misunderstanding is behind that dislike. In the end, that face, which is the delight or the terror of the universe, must be turned upon each of us either with one expression or with the other, either conferring glory inexpressible or inflicting shame that can never be cured or disguised. I read in a periodical the other day that the fundamental thing is how we think of God. By God himself it is not. How God thinks of us is not only more important, but infinitely more important. Indeed, how we think of him is of no importance except in so far as it is related to how he thinks of us. It is written that we shall stand before him, shall appear, shall be inspected. The promise of glory is the promise, almost incredible and only possible by the work of Christ, that some of us, that any of us who really chooses, shall actually survive that examination, shall find approval, shall please God, to be a real ingredient in the divine happiness, to be loved by God, not merely pitied, but delighted in, as an artist delights in his work or a father in a son. It seems impossible, a weight or burden of glory which our thoughts can hardly sustain. But so it is. And now notice what is happening. If I had rejected the authoritative and scriptural image of glory and stuck obstinately to the vague desire which was at the outset my only pointer to heaven, I could have seen no connection at all between that desire and the Christian promise. But now, having followed up what seemed puzzling and repellent in the sacred books, I find, to my great surprise, looking back, that the connection is perfectly clear. Glory, as Christianity teaches me to hope for it, turns out to satisfy my original desire, and indeed to reveal an element in that desire which I had not noticed. By ceasing for a moment to consider my own wants, I have begun to learn better what I really wanted. When I attempted, a few minutes ago, to describe our spiritual longings, I was omitting one of their most curious characteristics. We usually notice it just as the moment of vision dies away, as the music ends, or as the landscape loses the celestial light. What we feel then has been well described by Keats as the journey homeward to habitual self. You know what I mean. For a few minutes we have had the illusion of belonging to that world. Now we wake to find that it is no such thing. We have been mere spectators. Beauty has smiled, but not to welcome us. Her face was turned in our direction, but not to see us. We have not been accepted, welcomed, or taken into the dance. We may go when we please, we may stay if we can. Nobody marks us. A scientist may reply that since most of the things we call beautiful are inanimate, it is not very surprising that they take no notice of us. That, of course, is true. It is not the physical objects that I am speaking of, but that indescribable something of which they become for a moment the messengers. And part of the bitterness which mixes with the sweetness of that message is due to the fact that it so seldom seems to be a message intended for us, but rather something we have overheard. By bitterness I mean pain, not resentment. We should hardly dare to ask that any notice be taken of ourselves, but we pine. The sense that in this universe we are treated as strangers, the longing to be acknowledged, to meet with some response, to bridge some chasm that yawns between us and reality, is part of our inconsolable secret. And surely, from this point of view, the promise of glory, in the sense described, becomes highly relevant to our deep desire. For glory meant good report with God, acceptance by God, response, acknowledgement, and welcome into the heart of things. The door on which we have been knocking all our lives will open at last. Perhaps it seems rather crude to describe glory as the fact of being noticed by God. But this is almost the language of the New Testament. St. Paul promises to those who love God not, as we should expect, that they will know him, but that they will be known by him, a Corinthians 3. It is a strange promise. Does not God know all things at all times? But it is dreadfully re-echoed in another passage of the New Testament. There we are warned that it may happen to any one of us to appear at last before the face of God and hear only the appalling words, "I never knew you. Depart from me." In some sense, as dark to the intellect as it is unendurable to the feelings, we can be both banished from the presence of him who is present everywhere and erased from the knowledge of him who knows all. We can be left utterly and absolutely outside, repelled, exiled, estranged, finally and unspeakably ignored. On the other hand, we can be called in, welcomed, received, acknowledged. We walk every day on the razor edge between these two incredible possibilities. Apparently, then, our lifelong nostalgia, our longing to be reunited with something in the universe from which we now feel cut off, to be on the inside of some door which we have always seen from the outside, is no mere neurotic fancy, but the truest index of our real situation. And to be at last summoned inside would be both glory and honor beyond all our merits, and also the healing of that old ache. And this brings me to the other sense of glory, glory as brightness, splendor, luminosity. We are to shine as the sun. We are to be given the morning star. I think I begin to see what it means. In one way, of course, God has given us the morning star already. You can go and enjoy the gift on many fine mornings if you get up early enough. What more, you may ask, do we want? Ah, but we want so much more, something the books on aesthetics take little notice of. But the poets and the mythologies know all about it. We do not want merely to see beauty, though, God knows. Even that is bounty enough. We want something else which can hardly be put into words. To be united with the beauty we see, to pass into it, to receive it into ourselves, to bathe in it, to become part of it. That is why we have peopled air and earth and water with gods and goddesses and nymphs and elves. That though we cannot, yet these projections can, enjoy in themselves that beauty, grace, and power of which nature is the image. That is why the poets tell us such lovely falsehoods. They talk as if the west wind could really sweep into a human soul, but it can't. They tell us that beauty born of murmuring sound will pass into a human face, but it won't, or not yet. For if we take the imagery of Scripture seriously, if we believe that God will one day give us the morning star and cause us to put on the splendor of the sun, then we may surmise that both the ancient myths and the modern poetry, so false as history, may be very near the truth as prophecy. At present we are on the outside of the world, the wrong side of the door. We discern the freshness and purity of morning, but they do not make us fresh and pure. We cannot mingle with the splendors we see. But all the leaves of the New Testament are rustling with the rumor that it will not always be so. Someday, God willing, we shall get in. When human souls have become as perfect in voluntary obedience as the inanimate creation is in its lifeless obedience, then they will put on its glory. or rather that greater glory of which nature is only the first sketch. For you must not think that I am putting forward any heathen fancy of being absorbed into nature. Nature is mortal, we shall outlive her. When all the suns and nebulae have passed away, each one of you will still be alive. Nature is only the image, the symbol. But it is the symbol Scripture invites me to use. We are summoned to pass in through nature beyond her into that splendor which she fitfully reflects. And in beyond nature, we shall eat of the tree of life. At present, if we are reborn in Christ, the Spirit in us lives directly on God. But the mind, and still more the body, receives life from Him at 1,000 removes, through our ancestors, through our food, through the elements. The faint, far-off results of those energies which God's creative rapture implanted in matter when He made the worlds are what we now call physical pleasures, and even thus filtered, they are too much for our present management. What would it be to taste at the fountainhead that stream of which even these lower reaches prove so intoxicating? Yet that, I believe, is what lies before us. The whole man is to drink joy from the fountain of joy. As St. Augustine said, the rapture of the saved soul will flow over into the glorified body. In the light of our present specialized and depraved appetites, we cannot imagine this torrens voluptatis, and I warn everyone seriously not to try. But it must be mentioned, to drive out thoughts even more misleading, thoughts that what is saved is a mere ghost, or that the risen body lives in numb insensibility. The body was made for the Lord, and these dismal fancies are wide of the mark. Meanwhile, the cross comes before the crown, and tomorrow is a Monday morning. A cleft has opened in the pitiless walls of the world, and we are invited to follow our great captain inside. The following him is, of course, the essential point. That being so, it may be asked what practical use there is in the speculations which I have been indulging. I can think of at least one such use. It may be possible for each to think too much of his own potential glory hereafter. It is hardly possible for him to think too often or too deeply about that of his neighbor. The load or weight or burden of my neighbor's glory should be laid daily on my back, a load so heavy that only humility can carry it, and the backs of the proud will be broken. It is a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses, to remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet, if at all, only in a nightmare. All day long we are in some degree helping each other to one or other of these destinations. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities, it is with the awe and the circumspection proper to them, that we should conduct all our dealings with one another, all friendships, all loves, all play, all politics. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilization, these are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. This does not mean that we are to be perpetually solemn. We must play, but our merriment must be of that kind, and it is in fact the merriest kind, which exists between people who have, from the outset, taken each other seriously. No flippancy, no superiority, no presumption. And our charity must be a real and costly love, with deep feeling for the sins in spite of which we love the sinner. No mere tolerance or indulgence which parodies love as flippancy parodies merriment. Next to the Blessed Sacrament itself, your neighbor is the holiest object presented to your senses. If he is your Christian neighbor, he is holy in almost the same way, for in him also Christ vere latitat. The glorifier and the glorified glory himself is truly hidden, is truly hidden, is truly hidden, is truly hidden.
Do you feel like you're spinning in an endless cycle and yearning for a change? I bring good news. God is ready to renew your existence. He is by your side, shaping circumstances in your favor. Today I will reveal 10 signs that God is working quietly to elevate your life to new heights. When you notice these signs, recognize them as indications that a new phase is being drawn on your path. He hasn't forgotten you. If you haven't yet, take this opportunity to subscribe to the channel. You might be going through tough times that make you doubt God's presence. But remember, no adversity is eternal. God finishes what he starts. If he has kept you firm until now, he will surely complete everything concerning you, leading you to a more fulfilled life. As a Christian, be aware that the path won't always be smooth. Even Jesus Christ faced tribulations. However, be assured that the transformations you undergo are divine tools to improve your life. Changes happen progressively. As Ecclesiastes 3:1 says, "To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven." Transformations aren't instantaneous. They can take days, months, or years to materialize. God acts with order, carefully preparing you before highlighting you. Unfortunately, some people fail to perceive God's action in transitions. To ensure you don't miss these moments, here are 10 signs that attest that God is reshaping your life for the better. 1. You might encounter obstacles and barriers. Challenges and obstacles may arise in your path, but remember the promises of the Bible. We will never lack what is necessary. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Psalm 23:1. God, the possessor of all things, provides abundantly for those who seek to fulfill his purpose. But what if, even following his commandments, we encounter difficulties? Know that sometimes, even when aligned with God, we may feel that his provision becomes scarce. This is not a sign of abandonment, but an indication that you have become complacent, and God desires you to grow, as with the Israelites in the desert. He may temporarily withdraw comfort to push us forward. Do not see this as punishment, but as God's liberation from circumstances that limit your growth, preparing you for a new season of blessings. Face challenges with faith and follow divine direction. He will guide you to the promised land. In the face of adversity, do not despair. Hand over your worries to Jesus and find peace and rest. It's not suffering, but the causes of suffering that are illusory. 2. You feel uneasy and unsettled in your comfort zone. A feeling of restlessness and discomfort begins to arise even when you are apparently secure in your usual routine. Do you feel this internal agitation, a discomfort in the soul, despite everything externally seeming in order? This is often an indication that you are on the threshold of a phase of change. There is an absence of tranquility, although everything around you appears to be in perfect harmony. If this happens, stay calm. There is nothing wrong with you. It is simply a sign that God is calling you to a higher purpose. This incessant desire is God's way of sowing deep dissatisfaction within you. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. Romans 12:2. God places this burden on your heart as an invitation to explore new and grand horizons in his presence. Imagine, for example, that you have the dream job that everyone desires. Your life seems to flow without setbacks, yet there is still a sense of incompleteness. This is a divine stimulus to seek even more extraordinary opportunities. In such moments, seek God fervently and ask for guidance and clarity in your path. God doesn't want something from us. He simply wants us. C.S. Lewis. 3. God will arrange divine encounters along your path. At each stage of life, God positions specific people to assist you. They are collaborators of destiny, aligned with God's purpose for your existence. God establishes these connections in mysterious and unexpected ways. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. They may be people already present in your life, such as mentors, friends, or relatives, or even strangers who appear to support you at crucial moments. They are the encouragers who push you to move forward to new chapters in your story. The Apostle Paul experienced such divine connection. After his conversion, God sent him Barnabas, who not only introduced him to the other apostles, but also supported him in spreading the gospel. You are never too old to set a new goal or to dream a new dream. Lewis. Even if your destiny collaborator hesitates initially, God has the power to soften hearts and transform reluctance into support, as assured in Proverbs 21. 1. The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. He directs it wherever he pleases. 4. God will refresh your vision and ignite a new passion within you. Transformation of perspective is essential for spiritual and personal growth. Often, it is necessary to change our worldview before we can ascend to new levels of achievement. Popular wisdom tells us that repeating the same acts while expecting different results is an exercise in futility. Indeed, to experience a fuller and richer life, changes are necessary in various areas, including relationships, friendships, and even character. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. Romans 12:2. Just as Abraham needed to separate from Lot for God's promise to be fulfilled in his life, we often need to let go of what prevents us from prospering. However, detachment requires action. It is not enough to just pray for change, but also to be willing to let go. Allow God to prune the fruitless branches of your life, discarding harmful behaviors and detrimental relationships. This is done so that you can discover a deeper and more meaningful purpose. When this change occurs, embrace the new passion that God will awaken in you, and watch as He illuminates your unique talents and gifts. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Psalm 51:10. 5. You will discover new opportunities revealed in your life. As your life transforms for the better, God positions you in the right place, at the right time, to embrace specific opportunities. These opportunities are not always exactly what you desire, but it is essential to trust that God aligns them with His purposes for your journey. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. Accepting new opportunities can be challenging, especially when we are accustomed to what we already know. However, remember that God does not lead you from a trivial level to another equal one. He elevates you to higher and more significant levels. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your paths. Proverbs 3:5-6. Some people, when faced with these opportunities, choose to use them for personal benefit without glorifying God. However, there are inspiring examples, like Esther, who, upon becoming queen, chose to use her position to help her people. When you are determined to serve God, opportunities continue to arise, and He empowers you to play a greater role in His work. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is His megaphone to rouse a deaf world. C.S. Lewis. Trust the journey, for God is writing a story of glory through you. 6. You will find peace in the midst of uncertainties. Even when murmuring and complaints echo around you, your serenity remains intact. It is not that the problems have disappeared, but rather that God's presence in your life is the source of your stability. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Philippians 4:7. The peace that comes from him transcends any human logic, and when it fills your heart, it establishes a state of calm. There may be moments when you do not fully understand the changes occurring. However, it is important to recognize that these are indications of a divine transition. I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. Lewis. God is signaling that he is guiding you to a future more promising than the present you know. Perhaps the new direction he proposes is not immediately attractive to you, but a quiet certainty surrounds it. This peace is the means by which God can transform your life, leading it down unexpected and blessed paths. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Psalm 27:1. 7. Your faith in God will grow stronger. Trusting God is fundamental to establishing a deep connection with him. There are moments when placing our faith in God can seem like an immense challenge, while in others it seems to happen naturally. Interestingly, it is the obstacles and adversities that often drive us to strengthen our faith. It may sound paradoxical, but it is a reality. Take the story of Joseph, for example. Destined to be a leader, he faced hostility from his own brothers from a young age, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. Despite this, he did not abandon his dreams. Sold as a slave by his brothers, Joseph could have questioned his destiny. However, he persisted. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Psalm 27:1. With each setback, his faith in God intensified, and he remained firm until fulfilling God's purpose for his life. The challenges he faced not only strengthened his trust in God, but also expanded his wisdom. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. C.S. Lewis. Joseph acquired heavenly wisdom that enabled him to lead with justice. No matter how arduous your struggle, keep your faith unshakable. God is leading you to a future that transcends your current circumstances, strengthening your faith so that you can shine for his glory. 8. Your journey of transformation will lead to a divinely orchestrated restoration. Restoration often follows loss as a prelude to renewal, as Joel 2:25-26 reveals to us. I will restore to you the years that the locusts have eaten, my great army which I sent among you. You will have plenty to eat until you are full, and you will praise the name of the Lord your God, who has worked wonders for you. Never again will my people be shamed. This biblical passage assures us that what was lost will be recovered. Echoing the story of Job, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. Psalm 23:1-2. By surrendering to God's direction, you will feel the breath of his favor in all spheres of your existence. He will restore what was damaged and overflow your life with blessings, peace, joy, and fullness. I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. C.S. Lewis. When you feel this transformation, recognize it as a sign of God's transition, leading you to a season of abundance. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews 11:1. Embrace this change with gratitude, for God's promises are infallible and eternal. 9. As God changes your life, you will notice divine signs, like guiding lights on your journey. God is not an author of confusion. He illuminates each step you take, for God is not a God of disorder, but of peace. 1 Corinthians 14:33. These confirmations can manifest in various ways: divine interventions, prophetic messages, or even a sermon that seems specifically directed at you. Do you remember Gideon, the biblical hero? When God called him to lead the Israelites against the Midianites, Gideon hesitated. He asked for a sign. He placed a fleece on the threshing floor. If the dew was only on the fleece and the ground dry, he would know that God was calling him. God met the request, but Gideon still sought confirmation. He asked for another sign, the fleece dry and the ground covered with dew. God again responded, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" Psalm 27:1. These signs were divine confirmations that God was with Gideon in his mission. Likewise, pay attention to the visions, dreams, and impulses of the Holy Spirit in your life. God cannot give us a happiness and peace apart from himself, because it is not there. There is no such thing. C.S. Lewis. They are God's seals of approval, indicating that he is guiding you to a greater purpose. 10. You will be motivated to follow God's ways with increased passion. Divine love is incomparable and reveals itself in extraordinary ways. Curiously, the closer you get to God, the more intensely you feel love for him. We love because he first loved us. 1 John 4:19. This indicates that without a true knowledge of God, loving him can seem like a challenge. Obedience is an authentic expression of this love. Teach me to do your will, for you are my God. May your good spirit lead me on level ground. Psalm 143:10. As you feel compelled to act according to what pleases God, even in the face of difficulties, it is a clear sign that he is molding not only your heart but your entire being. God is reshaping you to reflect the person he planned you to be, with a heart like that of Jesus. Prayer itself is an absolute, a personal act, the offering of a finite being to his Creator. But as the currency of prayer passes through the current of nature and society, so prayer, like other currencies, is sometimes forged. C.S. Lewis. By accepting this transformation, you will experience a deeper and more intimate connection with God than ever before. Beloved child of God, during the challenging seasons of life, be attentive to the signs that God is at work, transforming your existence into something even more magnificent. May these signs reaffirm God's work in you, guiding you toward the heavenly purpose drawn. Surrender to this journey, trust in God's direction, and submit to his transforming power. May joy be your companion in the decisive moments of change. Lord, before your majesty, I acknowledge your sovereignty over my life. I am grateful for your mercy that protects me and for your hand that guides me. I praise your name eternally. I thank you for the evidence that you are shaping my path for the better. Guide me, Lord, and strengthen me in this transformation. I place my trust in your divine plan and surrender to your will. Grant me strength and courage to face the changes that lie ahead, trusting fully in your timing and purposes. In the transitions, even if arduous, help me to see the opportunities and hidden blessings, and to persevere with an unshakable spirit. Jesus faced adversities from birth to the cross.